Are you tired of being the bottleneck every time a new team wants to start a project? As a platform engineer, you're constantly answering the same questions: CI/CD setup, security defaults, repo structure, catalog registration, over and over again. And every team spins things up differently. Standards drift, security gets missed, and you're left cleaning it up later. In this episode, I'll show you how Golden Path templates in Backstage let you define standards once and scale them automatically across every new service. Stay with me, because this is how platform teams move from gatekeepers to enablers. Let's build a golden path. Welcome back to the Backstage YouTube series, and now we are in episode 2. So if you missed episode 1, make sure you go back and watch that episode and come back to watch episode 2, Golden Path Templates. The project setup problem. Imagine you're starting a new project. How do you get started? Well, you might copy an existing project that you had, rip out the business logic, fix the configurations for a day or so, ask 3 people in your organization about CI/CD, wonder about best practices, and maybe 2 weeks later, you're actually writing code. Sound familiar? Let's talk about the golden path. What is a golden path? It's a pre-paved, organization-approved way to build software with all the best practices baked in. So don't think of it as a restriction, but rather it's a fast lane that's also the correct lane from the beginning. What's included automatically in such a golden path or template? Security configurations, CI/CD pipelines, documentation structure, monitoring setup, catalog registration. So standards are defined once, but the benefits are forever. What are some of the components of the templates that we would need to build? The first component is parameters, and the purpose of that is providing a format for users to input data. So think of it as a form. The second component is a skeleton, and this is where you have templates with variables, and it will create such a file template for you to start with in a GitHub repo, for example. And then the third component is steps. And these are actions that will create repositories, register a component, and a few other things. So the result of using templates, well, before you would take days to set up. You'd have inconsistent configuration, you would have missing security best practices, and a lot of manual registration for your different components like APIs and front-end microservices and so on. But after using templates, the idea is that we're going to move from days of setup to minutes. We're going to standardize all our configs, and we're going to have built-in security from the beginning, and we're going to have automatic registration for all our components. What we're going to demo in this episode is basically 4 main things. The first one is we're going to walk you through a template structure, and then we're going to have a working template that we're going to build, and then we're going to execute this live, and then we're going to see the generated project at the very end. Once again, stick around for a preview of episode 3 right near the end of this video. But for now, let's go ahead and build. Just a quick plug before we continue. This video is part of my Backstage 101 course, where we dig much deeper into the internals of Backstage and how to build a real internal developer portal. We cover the service catalog, software templates, tech docs, auth, search, and even how to deploy it to production. The course includes over 35 hours of video and 11 hands-on labs. You also get a certificate and a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're interested, check it out in the description below. All right, let's get back to our lesson. We can now go to section 2, templates, documents, and automation, and the lab, build your first template. I've already run this lab for us, and it's ready to go, so we don't have to wait. So enter the lab. So we'll do that, and then I'll come back and talk about the configuration. So let's go ahead and take a look at step 3 here, testing a template execution via the Backstage UI. So let's go here, refresh the Backstage app itself. And let me make this a bit bigger for us to see better. Enter. And right here, we want to go to create, because this is where the templates get saved. So we have our Node.js microservice template. And all this is configurable. So you can see the description here, a bunch of tags, some documentation, and who owns this particular template, platform team. So if you click on choose, you'll see that we have a few steps or pages in terminology of templates. These are pages. So there's the project information, repository and integration, technical configuration, and a review. Think of it from the perspective of who's going to use this template, and that's developers. The platform engineering team is the one that actually built this template for the developers. So now the developer is going to fill out this form. There's a form per page. So let's go ahead and follow the documentation here. It tells us to create this my first service is the service name. Give it a description. My first Backstage template service, for example. And then team owner. So you select one of the teams that you're a part of as a developer, let's say backend. Next, the next page is to define the repository and our integration. So the GitHub user, whether that's an organization or a particular individual. Repository name, we can name it the same thing as the service. Whether we want enabling CI/CD pipelines, we'll leave that enabled. The database integration, we have a few databases. And remember, this is all built by the platform team, and they're building in the standards of the organization straight into the template. So now we have a self-service portal. Users or developers can be confident in building an application based on what the platform team and the whole organization actually has in place. So we're going to run on port 3000, including Swagger OpenAPI documentation, include health check endpoints, initial API version. Let's go with semantic versioning, software license. So whatever licenses we have decided to configure for our developers. And then there's the review page of all the selection that we made. You can go ahead and click create. What this is going to do behind the scenes is going to enable something called a scaffolder that's going to go and build what we wanted. So it's going to fetch some skeleton files. It will set up the CI/CD pipeline, create the GitHub repository, register the service inside of Backstage, and then give us some logs. So at the bottom here are all our logs. If you want to make sure that everything ran smoothly, you can take a look at the logs down here. There's a bunch of outputs that we have in place here, like successfully created my first service. This is all built by the platform team for whatever output that they're looking for. Next steps, for example, gives us what the developer needs to do as a next step, so they can clone this repository on their own machine, install some dependencies. All that is also probably added in the README of the repository. You can jump into view the repository by clicking here, and you'll see right away our repository that got created. A lot of this was templated. So you can see the README file here. It grabbed the name of the service, my first service, and they grabbed the documentation. It grabbed the description. See the quick start. All this was, and even port 3000, this was used based on the inputs that the user put in place, right? So all that was templatized. And in addition to that, we have a source folder. This is all part of what we call a skeleton, a source folder with an index.ts. It's a TypeScript. So we've basically scaffolded this for our developers with some routes, API, health, even tests are embedded in here, an env example file, and the Docker file also ready to go. The catalog info here is how we registered this service directly and right away into our Backstage catalog. See a package.json as well. And in addition to that, we have a pipeline. Here is a GitHub Actions pipeline. And if we jump into our actions here, you should be able to see that, there we go. Our first initial commit for this repository has succeeded for the first GitHub action that ran. Of course, you can make changes as a developer to that if you wish. But that kind of show you how we're able to embed all the standards of our organization. All right, let's see what else we have here. We've got technical configuration. This is just walking us through how to build our template and just walking through the different files that got created. So all that looks good. We can verify the catalog registration as well. So if we go to the home page and notice my first service got registered in the catalog, if you click on it, you'll see here's the view source. If you click that, that takes us directly to our GitHub. So if somebody later on comes and is onboarded or added to this team, they're able to understand where the repo is, who the owner is, what system it's part of, life cycle, it's a type service, any relationships that it might have. So that is all, again, done through our self-service portal. So what we've accomplished basically is we have a rich metadata and tags that were built in. You can see a lot of tags here. Multi-form page with validation, help text, conditional fields. I'll show you that in just a minute. Comprehensive skeleton with template files, automated a pipeline. We've got some helpful outputs for the template, some GitHub integration as we saw, and real world testing all in the same place. So if we were to go into our code editor, and I'll walk you through a few things here. So the appconfig.yaml, again, this is our configuration file for Backstage. So we've seen this a few times already. The location, this is very important for the catalog. We've included the location for our templates here and the rule allow templates. So that's important. Actually, this was built in, the examples template. This is what we added. So of type file, and the target is in a templates folder, Node.js service templates, template.yaml. So if we were to go and look for it, scroll down here under templates, Node.js service template, and here is where all the magic happens. So the template.yaml, this is where we've configured that template that we saw and how we interacted with it. So it is of kind template, and this is the description we saw. There are some tags that we saw, some of the links that we had, and here's the spec, who the owner is, type service, system, and parameters is where you define the user input for the form. And we have 4 pages, and it starts with a title here, for example, the project information title, what required fields that you need in here, the name, the description, the owner, and then the properties themselves. So for name, it needs a title of service name, type string, a description, some pattern for validation, minimum length, maximum length, and so on. And we talk through all of that through the course of this lab as you go through the different tasks. Here's our description, the owner, this is the team owner, and that's page 1. Now we move on to page 2, the repository and integration. So who the GitHub owner is and repository name. These are required fields, and you can see that there. Enabling CI/CD, remember we had it as a Boolean and it was checked by default. Default is true. The database type, we selected Postgres, and you can see it's enumerated here. Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, or none. The next page, which is page 3 now, is the technical configuration that we saw. Default port number, we have the default is set to 3000, but we do have a minimum and maximum that developers can choose from, including the Swagger documentation, again, a Boolean, including the health check and the API version that we want to use. So we used semantic version 1.0.0. So you can see the enum here and the enum names. This is what was displayed for us, and these are the values that show up. The license here. And then after that, we have the steps. So the scaffolding steps that generate the actual project. So I have a few steps here. The first one is fetching the skeleton files, which we'll see in just a minute here. These are all the skeleton files inside this folder. And you can see the URL is within the same folder skeleton. You have a few values that you can see here that we're passing into the scaffolder. So things like name. And by the way you pass variables, parameters.name, this is the name that was taken in from the user as an input, at the very beginning over here, right? So this name property, this description, these we can capture from the user as the input, these values in the form, and we can pass them around. So we're passing them over to inside our skeleton so we can display that. As we saw before, we were able to display that in the README file, for example. At the bottom here, my first service, that was displayed through or passed through from the input that the user gave all the way to the skeleton for the scaffolder to put inside the files that the developers are going to use. So a bunch of inputs here, name, description, owner, and so on. The next step is creating the CI/CD. So this is how we were able to create the workflow. So the target path is the URL CI/CD templates and GitHub workflows. And then we're publishing this in GitHub. So we have a new repository that gets created inside of GitHub. And then we're registering the service inside the service catalog inside of Backstage. And then we're outputting a bunch of logs. Finally, we're giving output back to the developer. So we saw they successfully created and passing in a bunch of parameters as well that we saw, and the service details and so on. And we also have some conditionals that you can use with nunchucks. So this is the templating language that Backstage uses. So you can pass in a few conditionals like this one. If the database type is not none, so show us what database type was used. Same thing with the CI/CD, whether it's enabled or not, and we'll display CI/CD GitHub Actions enabled or not. What's included, here's another output, next steps, another output as well, development resources, and a bunch of links. We saw a lot of buttons and links that were shown that point to different places like the repository, some documentation, a Slack channel, and so on. So that's how you can build this template and make it as flexible as possible, depending on your developers and what they need. And from here, let's go and take a look at the skeleton folder. And this is where all the files that we saw that were pushed into the repository exist. So here's the README, for example. And as you can see, the README has some nunchuck templates. So the values.name title will show up here, values description, the owner, all that again is pulling the variables from when we pass them in, and then it renders it inside of our repo. So that's the README. Here's our source file. We saw the routes, the utilities. Here's the catalog info.yaml as well. It's using templating also so that we can register this service in Backstage. Here's our Docker file. And once again, we're adding some values through templates. And this is it. This is what you will create for your users as you have them create a brand new service or brand new application. You can have this scaffolding in place. Here's the CI/CD templates, the CI pipeline that we have defined that you'll see also inside of the GitHub repo under the GitHub workflows. Here it is, the CI pipeline, the exact same one here. And it is all done through templating and through running this template through Backstage. Now we're going to jump into our next lab and see how we can deploy using Docker Compose and how we can Dockerize or containerize the Backstage application so we can run this in production. Now let's move to section 3 and we're going to jump into the Docker deployment lab. Once again, I've already deployed this lab ahead of time so we can move a little bit faster. And I've also gone ahead and skipped all the tasks so we can see the end result. But basically in this lab, we learn how to create the Docker file, configure Postgres as the database, and use a Docker Compose file so we can run both Backstage and Postgres. And then we talk about production deployments with secrets as opposed to using environment variables. So let's go ahead and see what this last task has for us. So we talk about why Docker secrets matter as opposed to using environment variables. And then we show how we can use Docker Compose to bring up the whole all the services, which is basically Postgres and Backstage. We go through where we store the secrets. So you can see if we go into our folder here, so change directory to labs, and then go into the developer portal. And from here, you can see the Docker compose file. So if we want to take a quick look at that. So here it is. We got two services, Postgres. This is our database. And we also have Backstage. And Backstage is building off of a Docker file, whereas we're using an actual image here from Postgres directly for the database. And a few environment variables, as you can see here. And if we go and look at the secrets file here, and if we cat Postgres password secret, we see it's right here. And of course, the secrets directory should be excluded from version control. Password files should have restrictive access. So you can see here, it's only read write for the user, and strong randomly generated passwords in production, of course. The production Docker compose file is right here. And notice the Postgres password, right? We're going to move away from using this as the Backstage secret to the actual file. And finally, we deploy this to production. So once again, we run the Docker compose up and specify the Docker compose production file, which we can actually see from here. Compose production. And if you see for this file, we're using the actual secret in that file. And then we can wait for it and it should be up and running. But if we run Docker compose PS right now, we should be able to see it. And there we go. If I hide the instructions real quick, you can see here we've got the Postgres database and we have the Backstage image. So the Backstage image is running on port 7007. If you recall, before we were running front end on port 3000 and back end on port 7007. With a Docker container, everything is in the same container and we're running on 7007. Okay, and we just go through the different security improvements. And once again, you can go into the Backstage app, enter here, and you can see everything is running as normal. All we're doing is that we're changing our deployment from using systemd, and now we're going to Docker. And once again, I showed you the end result, but if you want to see in detail how we got here, you can go ahead and take a look at each one of these tasks. So from writing the Docker file to configuring the Postgres SQL, and of course we saw already the Docker compose file, creating the Docker compose file, and finally, from a security point of view, using secrets. I think I didn't show you the Docker compose file, so might as well do that. If you go in here and cat Docker, I'm sorry, not the Docker compose, the Docker file itself. Docker file, here we go. This is our Docker file, so you can see from node 22, that's where we're starting, and the different run commands that we have here. Copy command, changing chmod here, user is node, so we're not using user root, and so on and so forth, right? We are creating a Docker file for running Backstage itself. This will come in handy if you decide to run in production with Docker Compose. For small shops, that might be fine. Later, we'll see how we can deploy on Kubernetes, and we'll pretty much use the same Docker file or the same idea since we've now Dockerized Backstage itself. In our next episode, this is called Enterprise Scale. We're going to talk about authentication, permissions, and Kubernetes. We're going to take this to the next level. Our Backstage deployment is now going to be on Kubernetes in a production style deployment. We're going to implement single sign-on with Keycloak for thousands of users, and we'll implement role-based access control for permissions. So once again, episode 3 is scaling from 20 developers, let's say, to over 2,000 and more. And again, if you want hands-on practice, you can check out the Backstage 101 course link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in episode 3.